Okay, this is going to be about, it's the 100-year anniversary of the tank, and this year, they started in 1917. This is the first of the new generation tanks. This is the first true 5th generation tank. It's the Russian Armida. Now, it had a little bit of production problems at the first, but they've kind of ironed it out, and this is the best tank on the planet right now. The basis of it is going to be for a whole family of fighting vehicles, the basic chassis. It has 3 people, it's automatically loaded, it's got the largest smoothbore gun of any tank. It's very, very advanced. It's actually going to be drone capable here. It's probably drone capable now, they just haven't released it. They're probably working out the bugs and everything. I want to cover some of the other main battle tanks, the ones everybody's aware of. The M1 Abrams, which has been, you know, the benchmark for a long time now. They get retooled periodically in Alabama. They'll just redo the whole thing to make sure the armor's good. And this is there probably will never be a standard tank battle like, say, for instance, the Battle of the Bulge that happened. It has 2 sister tanks, really 3 sister tanks. The Russian, the German Leopold, the Leopard tank, is comparable to it, and obviously there are allies. And then the British Chieftain with his Chittlebland armor. And this is the semi-famous Merkava Mark IV, the Israeli tank. They don't have many of them. Only one has ever been taken out, and that's because they used a mine for a ship to blow it up. Want to go over one of the seminal battles that the tanks were involved in that nobody really knows about. Russia invaded Finland on the Karelian Peninsula, and it was called the Winter War. And that war actually emboldened Hitler to invade Russia later on. I mean, he always wanted to do it. He said in Mein Kampf that he wanted to invade Russia, and you know the big war was going to be between the Aryans and the Slavs. But this is the one that really emboldened him. So when they invaded, they enlisted this old retired general, Carl Gustav Mannerheim. He created this thing called the Mannerheim Line. It was basically a lot of wooden fortifications, but the Russians were ill prepared for the winter, and they kind of got their ass handed to them. I mean, technically they won the war, but the Finns really decimated them. They really decimated their tanks. The greatest sniper of all time was a man named Sammo Haha. Check him out. They called him the White Death. He had over 730 confirmed kills, and these were mostly with iron sights. He wasn't even using a scope on most of them. They actually sent 2 airstrikes to try to get him, and they did injure him, and he went into a coma. He came out of the coma. He ended up living to like 100 years old. Just died maybe 10 years ago. But the joke was, or the saying was, when he came out of the coma, that's when the war ended. The Russians and the Finns signed a peace agreement because the Russians were scared because he came out of a coma. And like I said, that emboldened Hitler. And the Molotov cocktail was actually invented by the Finns, and a Molotov cocktail is basically a glass container that'll shatter, and it's got a third air, a third gas, and a third oil, and you have a wick, and you throw it. Well, the reason it's called a Molotov, there was a Russian, basically the war secretary was named Molotov, and so that was their way of, you know, giving him the finger, kind of. So what they would do is they would take the Molotov cocktail. Now, the original Russian tanks that came out in the 30s, they had an air intake in the back. So all they would do is come up on skis, because it's the winter, and, you know, these guys were, like I said, ill-prepared for the winter, and they would just come in and throw these Molotov cocktails, and if there wasn't any troops on the outside, they would throw them in the air intake there and just burn them all up. They'd also ski up during the storms while the tanks were moving, and use logs and crowbars to actually take the treads off of the tanks. And when they get out of the tanks, that's when they start chopping them up with snipers. So now the Russians did get a lot of feedback from that, and they reacted to it. And Hitler didn't have as easy a time, obviously, at all with them, because they got the feedback from the battle, and they made the changes on the air intakes, and they came out with a whole new kind of tank system. And Stalin also had a saying that there was a quality in the number of tanks, a precursor to what I call swarm technology. Now, what's the future going to hold for tanks? The future battlefield's going to be an integrated battlefield. You're going to have these little drone tanks that are going to be radio operated, and they're going to be around the big tanks. You're going to have these little you might have seen these robots that look like dogs, and they can react real fast. These will be climbing through buildings all the time. You're going to have drones everywhere. You're going to have A-10s. You're going to have the new DARPA tank that's super fast, that actually goes up and down to dodge and evade rounds. And I'll put about a 25-second clip on here later about this tank. You'll have a standard tank that looks much like the A-1's Abrams now. You're also going to have rapid drones everywhere. You'll have the Global Hawk, and what you'll have is, especially in urban environments, you'll have countermeasures. The opposing guys are going to take they're going to take the high ground, and they're going to basically just going to get tarps and line them kind of like your Block-It Pocket that stops your RFID from getting credit cards off of you, and they'll try to drop them on these autonomous drones down here, so they'll basically cause a Faraday cage to go over them and cut them off. They'll be dead. So it'll be a constant countermeasure. Now what's all this stuff up here? What's going to happen in the urban environment? The early stages, you have to operate with almost like a blitzkrieg. So what they're going to do is they'll have rapid reaction forces in helicopters dropped on top of buildings. So you'll drop a couple of squads of soldiers on the top of the building. Now they're going to go down into the building, blow up the stairwells, at least two stories down, so that nobody can get to them, so they can't fire through the floor to them. And they'll actually establish islands on top of buildings that are otherwise occupied by the enemy forces, and they'll put miniguns up there and rocket launchers, and they'll establish forward areas of fire to help facilitate this rapid reaction. Now, as anybody that knows anything about battle, it doesn't go as you plan for too long. So you have to be, this rapid reaction force, those little islands, they'll have to constantly be picking these guys up and putting them on other buildings in the area. But let's talk a little bit more about these drones. So DARPA's working on this tank, and let's do a little shoot of this. So this is the tank that they're working on. It's a rapid reaction tank. It's got movable armor. It can dodge. Remember, a lot of the charges from now on are going to be shaped. So if you can dodge them, there's a system called the Iron Fist, and if you can dodge the shaped charge, and if you'll see, it's got two roving bands of armor. So it's going to look a lot like, so these will be the rapid, super fast DARPA tanks that'll be the swarm technology. But let's talk a little bit about these drone tanks. So the Russians are really ahead on these drone tanks. Let me show you the concept on them here. We're going to let this run a little while here. So these tanks will be released in the battlefield. Again, it would be easy to cut them off with countermeasures. If you could throw like a net over them, it would cut them off from the outside. You wouldn't necessarily have these, and that's the company that produces these, but you wouldn't necessarily have these by themselves. You'd want to put them in, like I said, the swarm technology. So you would come in. The integrated battlefield is going to be a battlefield that's got air power, helicopters, Global Hawks overhead, drones everywhere. There'll be drones and counter drones everywhere. It's going to be a very dangerous place. You're going to have a lot of automation. You will still have rapid reactive infantry units, but they're going to be used non-traditionally. And this will be the first step of the war. Later on, it all breaks down, and you have to go back to traditional means. But the high-tech stuff, you hit them with hard, you hit them with fast. Subscribe if you can, and share if you would. Thank you. Bye.